Hello, I'm Jake, aka HamStuff, and this is the planet Earth. So we know what the Earth's made of. There's the crust, with continents and oceans beneath that, a mantle, and the core, which is very hot and heats the rest of it, including the mantle, which is why we have volcanoes, which is the heat of the Earth escaping to the surface. And it turns out there's an incredibly dangerous volcano here in Italy, the Campanian region in particular, in the Bay of Naples. An incredibly dangerous volcano indeed, that could wipe out an entire town or city. But I don't mean this one.
So if Vesuvius isn't the volcano in question, what is? Campi Flegrei, also known as Flegreian Fields. It's supposedly a supervolcano. It is indeed east of Naples, under the town of Pozzuoli, which is a lovely town. It's been around ever since Roman times. It used to be a Roman trading market. That's part of how we know there's a volcano there. You see, there's these Roman marble columns in the centre of town. They've got holes in them. It's a bit odd. But they don't seem to have been drilled by anything as far as we can tell. As it turns out, they were made by clams. Which doesn't seem to make sense. I mean, surely clams live in the ocean. They don't live in the centre of a Roman trading market. In a town on land. Well, maybe it used to be underwater, but I don't see why the Romans would build a trading market underwater. The sea level has only risen a few feet and fallen a few feet over that time, so that's not why. The ground, on the other hand, has moved a lot more. See, this isn't like Vesuvius. It's not a big symmetrical cone. It's a pit in the ground, a very wide one. This type of pit, this type of volcano, is called a caldera, which is a large depression in the ground caused when the volcano collapses into its own magma chamber. As the chamber inflates and deflates, it causes uplift and sinking of the ground above. The area sank and the columns were claimed by the sea, before later on rising back out again for us to see today. Some of the earliest recorded uplift in history was in 1538, which was followed by a minor eruption which formed the Monte Nuovo crater, which you saw on Google Maps. This wouldn't be the last time. In the 1980s, 1982, that there was so much uplift that boats couldn't get in. The ports were utterly unusable. Because boats go down a ramp to get into the ocean and these to get back out. If the ground has risen by 1.8 metres like it did back then, suddenly that ramp is above the level of the sea and you can't get up it unless your boat can fly, which boats don't do. And this wasn't the only thing that happened. Earthquakes. A lot of them. 500 tremors, in fact, happened in one night, back in April of 1984. So up to 2 metres, nearly, of ground left, and 500 earthquakes, it's decided to evacuate the town. And they did, because you don't want to be in a town above a volcano that seems like it's about to erupt. And all the signs are there. And the eruption didn't come. 2 years went by and started settling down. And people returned 2 years later and once again live in the town of Pozzuoli. And they go about their normal lives. But it seems a bit odd. The ground uplifts. The ground shakes. All precursors to an eruption. But it didn't. What stopped it? See, in a caldera, there's the ground, and there's what's known as cap rock above the magma chamber. And this particular cap rock is thought to be very ductile. Magma started going up to the surface, began to fracture the cap rock, but not completely. It fractured under pressure to an extent. So rock, if you throw a rock on the ground, it'll probably break. You can't bend a rock. But that's our normal experience. Over a long period of time, a large area of rock can bend and compress and twist in all sorts of shape, called plastic deformation. And a cap rock above Campi Flegrei is surprisingly ductile. And they found out when they took a little sample, studied it under microscope, there's a weird fibrous structure. Now, I don't know where that comes from, but we do know that it makes the rock strong and ductile. It's the loss of strength and the loss of force to break it, which prevented the eruption. However, if it takes that much more strength to break and cause an eruption, it means that eruption that happens will still come just at a later point. It'll be more powerful and more violent. This wasn't the last time there'd be uplift at Campi Flegrei. There's been small amounts of uplift since 2005. Other signs something might be happening at Campi Flegrei include gas. Lots of volcanoes emit gas in varying amounts from cracks in the ground called fumaroles. Now, the gas can change depending on the state of the volcano. As it begins to wake back up to a higher level of activity, you can study the changes in gas. Sort of increased amount of carbon dioxide, sulfur, and then steam. This could herald an upcoming eruption. Now, if you've seen the title of this video, it's not just about, ooh, it's a volcano, it's interesting. This supposed supervolcano, I'll be doomed if it erupts. I mean, you think the people of Pozzuoli and Naples would be? Certainly. Because I love volcanoes, I have a fair bit about them, but I don't know if there's an evacuation ban from Pozzuoli and Naples. They evacuated people last time, after 500 tremors in one night. That's just one small town. And I don't know where they're evacuated to. Possibly still in the local area. There could be up to 3 million people in direct threat from this volcano in the Campanian region of Italy. Then surely the rest of us in Europe, possibly the world, won't fare so great either. Except, then the media likes to call it a supervolcano. They never say which one is. They're pretty powerful, obviously. They've got the word supervolcano for a reason. But how powerful, how super are they? Well, how powerful is a volcano? Or the eruption of one? How do we measure them? Well, fortunately, there is a scale for exactly that, called the Volcanic Explosivity Index. So, 0 on the scale would be less than 0.1 meters squared of ejecta, which if you don't know what ejecta is, stuff blasted out of a volcano. That's ejecta. So 1 on the scale would be between 0.1 and 1 cubic meter. This is where we find, typical eruptions of Kilauea in Hawaii or Pinta Infernes on the island of the region. In fact, in the latter, people did used to be allowed into the summit Caldera, which isn't just a type of volcano, it's a volcanic feature. It can either be the entire volcano or just the crater on a volcano itself. They're formed in the exact same way. The volcano or part of it collapses into its own magma chamber. And on Pinta Infernes, people did used to be allowed into the caldera while eruptions were taking place. But I think over time people have understood it might not be the best idea, even for a small eruption, on a shield volcano, which is far less explosive than other kinds of volcano, and so it's become less and less common. So, a 2 on the scale, around 1 meter cubed to 10 meter cubed of ejecta. A 3 on the scale would be between 10 and 100 meters cubed, like Sufri Hills on the island of Montserrat during the 1990s, the mid-90s. Now, this buried several towns in pyroclastic flows, a hot avalanche of rock and ash and gas, which cascades down the mountain at great speed, and in fact buried the capital city of Plymouth, making it a modern day Pompeii. So a 4, 100 meters squared to 1,000 meters squared of ejecta. A 5 on the volcanic explosivity index would be 1 kilometer squared to 10 kilometers squared, like the eruption of Mount St. Helens in May 1980. A 6, 10 to 100 kilometers squared. With the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa, which did, as well as blowing itself to bits, form a caldera, as what remains collapsed into the magma chamber. A 7, 100 kilometers squared to 1,000 kilometers squared of ejecta. The scale goes up to 8, greater than 1,000 kilometers squared of ejecta. This is what Lake Toba in Indonesia, or the world famous Yellowstone supervolcano, would be capable of. So where would Campi Flegrei fall on this list? That would be a 7. Now, a VAI 7 isn't 8 like a supervolcano, but it's still incredibly powerful and violent. You don't want to be near there when it erupts. But would it destroy absolutely everything? It certainly won't destroy the world. It might not be that large an eruption, because the term supervolcano implies super eruption, and that's true. Supervolcanoes are capable of a super eruption. But we grade eruptions themselves, not volcanoes. It's far more likely there'll be a much smaller eruption. In fact, going back to Yellowstone, the scientist in charge, called Dr. Mike Poland, doesn't like the term supervolcano, because it isn't the best term, because it does imply it's the only way in which a volcano would erupt. People think, oh my god, Yellowstone's overdue. It's erupted 640,000 years ago. It's meant to go off every 500,000 years. It erupted about 73,000 years ago, within human timescales. But it was a very small eruption compared to what it's capable of, and that's what's most likely to happen the next time it erupts. The same for Campi Flegrei. VEI7 is the maximum that Campi Flegrei could unleash. not what's definite. It could be smaller, and is much likely, though even a small eruption could cause devastation, at least in the local area, Pozzuoli, Naples, the Campania region, and possibly beyond. It doesn't answer the question in the title. Will it doom us all? Probably not. It will erupt one day. Probably won't be 2020, or 2021, or 2, but one day it will erupt. And anybody in the area that doesn't evacuate would be doomed. But you can still evacuate. If it's similar to the eruption of Vesuvius that destroyed Pompeii, it would be an ultra-Plinian style eruption, which is a way of describing the particular nature of a volcanic eruption. So, big pointy mountain, do you think? Boom, mountain explodes, or at least the top of it explodes. Well, stuff would explode out the top. Pliny the Younger, one of the key witnesses and documenters of the eruption, described it as looking like a pine tree. Or rather, not pine trees, as we think of one of these.
This is a pine tree from the Campania region.
Because that's what the eruption column would look like. An eruption column, as the volcano explodes, throws stuff up into the air very quickly, and it goes very high in a very powerful eruption. And stuff that goes up has to come down. It will start raining down rock. Fortunately, since this rock is pumice, it has lots of air holes in it. Meaning I actually have something, if you were there, you could use to protect yourself from the falling pumice. A pillow. It's not a bulletproof pillow, it's a normal pillow. Because for the first couple of hours, the Pliny eruption, the most likely large eruption that could happen at Campi Flegrei, not the most likely scenario, but the likely worst case scenario, that's what would happen. There'd be pumice fall. In fact, that's what killed most people in Pompeii. Rock falls from the sky, they run and hide, and because houses in the region have flat roofs, it all piled up. It may be light considering that it's rock, but it's still rock, and a roof can only take so much. It's only after that the eruption column begins to collapse and causes pyroclastic flows. So even if you didn't evacuate before, it would still be at least a couple of hours to get away from that. So as much as I like dramatising things, as much as we love scaremongering and clickbait, I'm afraid I have indeed clickbaited you, and I am going to have to say, not really no. The eruption of Campi Flegrei wouldn't doom us all. Which I'm not going to lie, I am not particularly disappointed by. I'm not sure anybody will be. Because no one wants to hear that a volcano eruption will doom them all. In fact, Yellowstone, 10 times more powerful, at most, as Campi Flegrei is capable of, wouldn't be an extinction level event. Larger eruptions than that have happened in other places in the world during the human era. So a Campi Flegrei eruption certainly won't wipe us out. And given that it isn't going to doom us all, I can use my pillow not for protecting myself against pumice, but for resting easy in my bed tonight. I'm sure you can as well. Thank you for watching. You can like, subscribe. Ciao.